This week I called God. I said, he's genius. I'm not going against God's genius. And I'm not going against his protective love. So if we want to know what's wrong with the world, because our minds are manifested in the world. When you see what's going on in the world, you get a glimpse of everybody's mind. People try to be so private. People try to be so guarded. But guess what? Every action communicates who you are. What you don't say communicates who you are. Right? So we want to understand the importance of the mind. So we go back to the garden and we look to the God of the garden, the God, the creator of man. And it tells us that God breathed into Adam and he became a living soul. He became a nephesh. He became able to think, to feel, to worship, to be in relationship with, because of that breath of God. That is our beginning. And we know that it was very good. So there was no such thing as issues, mental health, family problems, disease, murder, sex trafficking. There wasn't hijacking. There wasn't any of that. Competition, right? Sunday's best, that wasn't in the garden. Right? None of that was in the garden. But God created a region of our minds that's responsible for our thoughts, our creativities, our feeling, and it allows us to be conscious of the world around us. So our minds are able to help us to interpret what is going on in the world, filter it through how we're experiencing it, and then to respond. Your mind plays a pivotal role in everyday activity. We serve God with our minds. We have spiritually bypassed our minds in the house of God. We've shouted, we've danced, we've spoken in tongues, and we've spiritualized what's going on in our minds. We really have. We haven't really just took time out to say, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's going on? And that is where some of us have failed. And so we're gonna use Adam and we're gonna use the prodigal son today, because I found out that people do better Monday Night Football than talk about themselves. We get 20/20 when we're talking about our neighbor, right? So I'm gonna ask you guys to join the clinical field with me today, and we're just gonna look at humanity. And if you're bold enough, you can look at how this is applying to me. You can see you. Right? Sometimes when we look at the Bible, all we see is the Jesus, and we reflect, we want to be like him. But we have to get into every character, even if it makes us uncomfortable, even if it makes us feel embarrassed, even if it makes us come down a notch or two. We have to be able to use those lenses. Amen? So we understand the importance of the mind. This is so important, you all. In 2021, 57.8 million adults have mental illnesses. The top 3 mental illnesses, as you can see, is anxiety, depression, PTSD, and these 3 make up 30% of mental illnesses. I try to find the most easiest way to get us to understand what a mental health is and what a mental illness is, but it's actually a health problem that significantly affects how you feel, how they think, how they behave, and how they have a relationship with self, God, and others, and their jobs. So when someone because we all have issues, it's called sin, but when someone is significantly struggling with their sins and their mental health, it's difficult for them to be in a relationship with themselves. They have low self-esteem. They think they're ugly. They think they're bad. They think they're not valued. They just have a negative. They have automatic negative thoughts. And they just can't find anything positive. They're stuck at the negative bias. And they can't be in a relationship with other people, usually. Because if you're not in a relationship with God, you can't be in a good relationship with yourself, and then therefore you can't be in a good relationship with other people. We see that walked out in the garden, right? We see the destruction of mental health by Adam. First, after he sinned, he had an issue with God. He didn't see God right. And then he hid himself because he didn't see himself right. And then he separated from his wife. He estranged himself from his wife. So your mental health has to do with how you see God, how you see yourself, and how you see other people. For those of you who say, I'm cool on people, I'm just going to go live in the mountains, well, you still would have a problem. You would have a problem with God, yourself, and the animals and the elements. Some people are running from people and not knowing that you can't run from yourself. You are people. So when you run, you're going to find you there no matter where you go. So that it's important to know that's the sign of mental health issues. And we all get sad. We all get anxious. Those are natural experiences, but it becomes an illness when it prohibits you from functioning at work, prohibits you from functioning in a relationship, prohibits you from taking care of yourself. Those are the challenges. Now, I talked about it a little bit, and we're going to roll through here. I just wanted to lay the foundation. The big one, the earthquake. You know, we live in California, y'all, and we all waiting for the big one. Yeah. Well, the biggest one already hit, and that biggest one was sin. So when sin took place, it shifted the plates, the stability, the foundation of Adam's thinking, of Adam's spiritual life, and of his physical life, because we know it did, because God said, you shall die. So although he was physically alive, he was separated from God, his mental health was impaired, and his relationship was impaired, and he no longer had the privilege of just being in the presence of the Lord in the raw, as my pastor would say. Now he has trouble. Yeah, that's the biggest earthquake. That was the disruptor. That's what happened. If you want to know, when you walk on Skid Row and you see people on Skid Row, you say, that's what happened. Yeah, you might look at the behavior and say the behavior happened, but you got to know sin happened. Somewhere down the line, a principle was broken, and that principle was connection with God, obedience to God. When you see somebody addicted to alcohol, you say, oh, they grew up in a bad home. No, you need to go deeper than that, and you need to know that sin happened. Disconnection happened. Truth was lost. There will be no healing. There will be no connection without truth. So that's the principle that we have to look at. So in those plates, just like a tsunami, you know what happens in a tsunami, right? Whenever there's a tsunami, the plates shift. And then there's this big old wave that comes out, and it destroys, and it becomes tumultuous. And so just like when there's a natural earthquake, what happens? The plates shift. So whenever you sin, your plates shift. Tell your neighbor, whenever you sin, your plates shift. And that plate shift means your mental health. It means your relationships. It means your connection to God. It means your physical health. There's nothing that you cannot sin and not have your plates shift. Plates shift. And the only answer is God. And what the enemy would have us to do is to keep looking at what's going on with people and, oh, they're crying, oh, they're hurt. The principle of the matter is your plates are shifted. That's too easy, huh? Can I tell you guys this? There are thousands of mental health interventions because man refuses to understand that the origin and the issues of our minds have to do with our relationship with God. Amen. They are experimenting. They have psychotropic medications. They have all of these ideas when the answer is connection with God. It's back to God, and then it's back to a principle. So even as a therapist, I'm giving people some of the principles that work, but that have been hijacked by the world, and they own it as their own. For example, mindfulness. You know, all that we just did, they leave God out of it, but they said singing is good for your nervous system. Praying is good for meditating. They don't say praying. Meditating is good for your nervous system. God already said that. So without acknowledging the connection and the break, you're going to continue to try to take medication. You're going to continue to chase people. You're going to look for love. You're going to try to tell your husband, I need you to do this. I need you to be nicer. I need you to buy me this. And if you don't realize what the real issue is the principle is we need to get people to rebuild their minds. You got to rebuild your mind. I'm tired of people shouting and speaking in tongues. That's okay. You can do all of that at home unless you have an interpretation for the body. I'm going to need you to operate. If we're going to make it through here, you all, this is the truth. We're going to make it through here, right here. We're not going to make it right here. This is your prefrontal cortex. This is where God meets you, and this is where his word transformed your life, because he said, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. He didn't say be transformed by your feelings. So if you're waiting to feel like doing better, then that's not a solid change. Your plates are still shifting. But when you make up your mind to connect with God, that is a cerebral experience. That happens right here. And most of us can't make that decision because we're always so stressed out. The devil is on our trail and we're running. And the Bible doesn't tell us to run from the devil. It tells us to resist the enemy and he'll flee. And not only that, but it says to draw nigh to God. Get back connected so that your plates can be sure. So that you have an anchorage when the winds of life are blowing your way. The house of God needs to be rebuilt. The people of God need to be rebuilt. We've turned into a feeling church. We don't feel good unless we shout. We don't feel good unless the word sounds good. But we don't want to be thinking. Our God is a creator. Our God is a thinker. Because guess what? The enemy's not coming for your shout. He's coming for your mind. He's coming to get you, to influence you to sin so that your plates will shift. Because when your plates shift, you're going to see God differently, you're going to see yourself differently, and you're going to see other people differently. And the victory, the battlefield is in the mind. He's not concerned about how much you come here. He's not concerned about how much you read your word. He's not concerned. The devil is not concerned about that. He knows more word than we do. He's concerned that if you take that one scripture and you wear it out, that you trust him, that you get the word of the Lord in your mind, and it creates the stability. It stops plates from shifting. You want to know why people are double-minded? Because their plates are shifting. Your plates are shifting. We serve God from the mind, not from our emotions. Our emotions are a reflection of what's going on in our mind. We lead in our relationship with your mind. Tell somebody, lead in your relationship with your mind. Because your feelings change too quick. Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't. That's what the commercial said. Almond Joy, right? So we want to be very clear about what's going on and how sin, it shifted Adam's plate. And it shifted humanity's plate. It was the onset of trauma, anxiety, depression, mental disorder, self-esteem, and living in the shadows and living in darkness. We got saints living in the shadows, covering up and hiding. We are people of the light. The shadow and dark represents ignorance and evil deeds. We don't live there. We get to be people of the light. We get to turn all the lights on. And even in our mental health, we get to turn all the lights on. It's an affront to God that we are not stable and that we are not sound mind. It's an affront to God.